You know, some neuroscientists have a pretty wild idea. They say the mind is simply what the brain does. Everything you are, your consciousness, your memories, your whole self, it's all happening inside that 3-pound chunk of tissue between your ears. So if we really want to understand the mind, well, we need to meet the master. Let's take a tour of the human brain.
So our story kicks off way back in the early 1800s with this German physician, Franz Joseph Gall. And this guy had let's call it a peculiar habit. He'd run his fingers over the scalps of total strangers because he was convinced that the bumps on their heads could reveal their personality. He called this whole practice phrenology.
Okay, so let's be super clear here. Phrenology was, and is, total pseudoscience. It was correctly tossed out. Turns out, the shape of your skull has absolutely zero to do with your character or how smart you are. It was just wrong. And yet, Gall was actually onto something huge.
Yeah, the flaw in his method was pretty obvious. Thinking bumps on your head meant anything. But hidden inside that completely wrong idea was an absolute game changer. The principle that different parts of the brain have specific jobs to do. This is what we now call the localization of function.
And this is the key takeaway, for sure. Localization of function means that if you could, say, stimulate different parts of my brain, you could literally control my movements, or trigger a long-lost memory, or even change my mood. A little zap right here, and my arm twitches. A zap over there, and bam, I'm suddenly remembering my 5th birthday party. It's all physically wired up in specific spots.
And you know, maybe no story shows this link between the physical brain and our personality more dramatically, or frankly more gruesomely, than the true story of a railroad worker named Phineas Gage.
So back in 1848, there's a workplace explosion, and it sends a 3-foot-long iron rod straight through Gage's head. And miraculously, he survived. But he wasn't the same person. The Phineas Gage who was once mild-mannered and friendly was now angry, profane, and just mean. His friends famously said he was no longer Gage. His mind had been physically altered right along with his brain.
And just to give you a sense of the sheer physical damage we're talking about, the doctor who treated him reported that during a coughing fit, a piece of his brain the size of a teacup just fell out of the wound. Yeah, this was not a subtle injury. This was a profound physical change.
Now, Gage's story might make you wonder how anyone could survive that, which kind of brings us to that old myth that we only use 10% of our brains. I mean, if that were true, losing a chump might not be a big deal, right? But it's just as wrong as phrenology. Brain scans show that pretty much every single region is humming with activity even when you're doing simple stuff. Plus, your brain is a total energy hog. It uses 20% of your body's calories. Evolution just wouldn't waste that much fuel on an organ that's mostly sitting idle.
So, to really see how all these parts work together, you can think of the brain's evolution kind of like a set of Russian nesting dolls. The newer, more complex systems were built right on top of the older, more basic ones. So let's open it up and start with that innermost doll, the oldest, most ancient part of your brain.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the old brain, the part that handles your basic survival. Then we'll move out to the limbic system, which is kind of the headquarters for emotion and memory. And we'll finish up with the cerebrum, that big outer layer responsible for all our higher-level thinking. So the old brain is basically your life support system. It all starts with the brainstem. On it, you've got the medulla. It's what's automatically controlling your heartbeat and breathing. You don't even have to think about it. Then there's the pons, which helps coordinate movement, and the thalamus, which is like a sensory switchboard for almost everything you see, hear, and feel. And finally, there's the cerebellum, or little brain, which manages things like balance and memory. It's actually the part that gets impaired by alcohol, which is why walking in a straight line gets so tricky after a few drinks.
All right, time to open up the next doll in our set. Sitting right between that old brain and the newer parts is the limbic system. Think of this as the border region where we process our big emotions, drives, and memories.
And inside this limbic system, we find 3 really important structures that all work together: the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the hippocampus.
So let's break down what they do. The amygdala, these 2 little lima bean-sized clusters, is tied to fear and aggression. Scientists have found that if you stimulate one spot, a totally chill animal can turn vicious in an instant. Then there's the hypothalamus. It regulates your body and houses these powerful pleasure centers, the same ones that give you that feeling of reward. And then you have the hippocampus, which is absolutely critical for forming new conscious memories of facts and events. And finally, here we are, the outermost and newest of our nesting dolls, the cerebrum. This is the part we all picture when we think of the brain.
It's the wrinkly, gray matter that acts as the seat of all our complex thoughts, our language, our consciousness.
And this thing is absolutely massive. The two halves of the cerebrum, the two hemispheres, make up a staggering 85% of your brain's total weight. This is where all the really complex stuff happens.
Now, you've probably heard that pop psychology idea about being left-brained if you're logical, or right-brained if you're creative. But here's the thing. The reality is that the two hemispheres are in constant communication with each other. Sure, some tasks are more focused on one side, like language is mostly in the left, but labeling entire people as one or the other is a huge oversimplification. It's just not how it works.
In fact, to bring this all full circle, saying someone is right-brained is about as scientifically useful as saying they have particularly bumpy heads. It's really just a modern-day version of phrenology. See, the cerebrum's surface is called the cerebral cortex and is divided into 4 lobes that have specialized jobs. You've got the frontal lobes right behind your forehead. They handle planning and personality. That's exactly what Phineas Gage damaged. Then the parietal lobes process touch and your body's position. The occipital lobes, way at the back, are all about sight. And the temporal lobes, near your ears, they process sound. This incredible specialization is exactly the big idea that Franz Gall got right, even if his methods were totally off. So after this whole tour, we come right back to that central idea. From the bumps on someone's head to the tragic story of Phineas Gage, we see this direct, undeniable link between our physical brain and our inner self, which leaves us with a final, pretty deep question to think about. If your mind really is just what your brain does, what happens to you when that physical brain changes?